On the night of her forced wedding, a desperate young woman flees into a moonlit forest to escape a life she doesn't want. There she encounters a dark, magnetic stranger who offers her freedom with a single kiss. Unbeknownst to her, he is the Vampire King, ruler of a hidden realm beneath the trees. That impulsive kiss binds her to his world and ignites a dangerous romance where escape comes at the cost of destiny. What happens when freedom comes with fangs and forever means eternity? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through silk curtains, casting golden patterns across the Persian rug where Elara Whitmore stood motionless, her father's signet ring glinting in her trembling palm. The heavy gold band bore the family crest, a lion rampant surrounded by thorns, and had been pressed into her hand moments before with words that still echoed. In her mind, like a death knell, "You will marry Lord Hartwell tonight. Elara." The contracts are signed, the dowry arranged. "This union will secure our family's position for generations." She closed her fingers around the ring until its edges bit into her flesh, welcoming the sharp pain as a distraction from the suffocating weight of her fate. 22 years of life, and all of it had led to this moment, standing in her childhood bedroom, dressed in ivory silk and Belgian lace, preparing to be handed over like property to a man who viewed her as nothing more than a profitable acquisition. The Whitmore estate sprawled across 300 acres of pristine English countryside, its Gothic revival architecture speaking to old money and older traditions. Every room held memories of a carefully orchestrated childhood designed to produce the perfect wife. Embroidery lessons in the morning room, French tutorials in the library, deportment classes in the grand ballroom. She had been shaped and molded like clay, expected to hold whatever form would best serve her family's interests. Lord Edmund Hartwell was 47 years old, possessed of considerable wealth from his shipping enterprises, and had buried 2 wives already. The first had died in childbirth, the second of a mysterious fever that had struck her down within months of their wedding. He was not unkind, Elara's father insisted, merely practical in his expectations. He required an heir and a hostess for his social obligations. Love was a luxury neither of them could afford. Miss Elara, her lady's maid Sarah, appeared in the doorway with eyes red from weeping. The young woman had served the Whitmore family for 5 years, and in that time had become more friend than servant. "Your father requests your presence in the drawing room. Lord Hartwell has arrived for the ceremony." Elara's stomach lurched. She had hoped for more time, perhaps hours, to reconcile herself to what could not be changed. Instead, she found herself being led down the familiar hallway, where family portraits gazed down with painted eyes that seemed to judge her reluctance. Generations of Whitmore women who had married for duty, produced heirs, and died forgotten in the margins of their husbands' achievements. The drawing room buzzed with conversation as distinguished guests admired the wedding gifts displayed on mahogany tables, crystal decanters, silver serving pieces, and jeweled ornaments, all the accessories needed to furnish a proper marriage. Lord Hartwell stood near the fireplace, his silver hair meticulously styled, his black evening dress impeccable. When he saw her, his pale eyes assessed her with the same attention he might give to evaluating livestock. "Ah, my dear Miss Whitmore." His voice carried the measured tones of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You look quite lovely this evening. I trust you are prepared for the ceremony?" Elara curtsied as she had been taught, keeping her eyes downcast. "Yes, my lord. I'm ready to fulfill my obligations." "Excellent. I've taken the liberty of arranging our departure for my estate immediately following the vows. My housekeeper has prepared the master suite for your arrival." The casual assumption that she would simply transition from one cage to another sparked something dangerous in Elara's chest. She raised her eyes to meet his gaze, searching for any hint of warmth or understanding. Instead, She found only cold calculation and the satisfied expression of a man who had successfully completed a business transaction. "I see." The words came out steadier than she felt. "And what of my personal belongings? My books and correspondence?" Lord Hartwell's thin smile suggested mild amusement at her concern for such trivial matters. "I'm sure my servants can collect whatever items are deemed appropriate for a lady of your new station. As my wife, you'll have little need for frivolous pursuits." The room seemed to shrink around her as the reality of her future crystallized. No books, no correspondence with the few friends who had shown her genuine affection. No autonomy over even the smallest decisions. She would become Lady Hartwell, a title that would erase Ilara Whitmore as completely as death. "The minister is ready," her father announced, consulting his pocket watch with the satisfaction of a man whose careful planning had come to fruition. "Shall we proceed to the chapel?" As the wedding party moved toward the small family chapel adjacent to the manor, Ilara felt each step carry her further from any possibility of escape. The chapel's stained-glass windows cast jeweled light across the assembled guests as Ilara stood at the altar, her reflection wavering in the antique mirror that hung behind the pulpit. The silvered glass had witnessed countless Whitmore ceremonies over the centuries, and now it seemed to mock her with distorted images of what she was about to become. Minister Blackwood's voice droned through the ancient vows, each word a link in chains that would bind her forever. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Miss Ilara Whitmore and Lord Edmund Hartwell in holy matrimony." Lord Hartwell stood beside her, his presence cold and imposing. She could smell his cologne, bergamot and something medicinal that reminded her unpleasantly of funeral parlors. His gloved hand rested proprietarily on her arm, already claiming ownership before the vows were complete. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," the minister continued, "but with reverence, discretion, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." Ilara's vision blurred as panic rose in her throat like bile. The chapel walls seemed to press closer with each passing moment, the faces of the guests becoming a sea of expectant strangers eager to witness her sacrifice. Even her father watched with cold satisfaction, seeing only the successful conclusion of months of negotiation. "Lord Hartwell, do you take Miss Ilara Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do you part?" "I do." His voice carried absolute certainty, the tone of a man claiming what he had purchased. The minister turned to her, his weathered face expectant. "Miss Whitmore, do you take Lord Edmund Hartwell to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love, honor, and obey, until death do you part?" Time suspended itself in that moment, stretching like honey in winter. Ilara stared at the antique mirror behind the altar, seeing not herself, but her mother's face gazing back with infinite sadness. Eldona Whitmore had died when Ilara was 15, but not before whispering words that had haunted her daughter ever since. "Never let them make you disappear, my darling. Promise me you'll fight for your own heart, Miss Whitmore." The minister's voice carried a note of concern. She looked at Lord Hartwell's expectant face, then at her father's increasingly stern expression, then at the assembled guests who waited to witness her surrender. The weight of generations pressed down upon her shoulders, all the Whitmore women who had spoken these vows and vanished into dutiful obscurity. The word caught in her throat like a thorn. "Speak up." "Child," her father commanded sharply. "Complete your vows." But instead of the expected words, Ilara found herself stepping backward, her hands trembling as she gathered her silk skirts. "I cannot." The chapel erupted in shocked murmurs. Lord Hartwell's face darkened with barely controlled fury. "What did you say?" "I said I cannot." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I cannot promise to love, honor, and obey a man who sees me as property. I cannot disappear into a life that offers no joy, no choice, no hope. Ilara." Her father's voice cracked like a whip. You will complete this ceremony immediately, or you will find yourself with nothing, no family, no fortune, no future." She met his gaze steadily, her mother's words echoing in her memory. "Then I choose nothing over this." Before anyone could react, she turned and ran. Her silk slippers slapped against the stone floor as she fled down the center aisle, past the shocked faces of guests, past the wedding gifts that now seemed like burial offerings. Behind her, she heard Lord Hartwell's furious shout and her father's commands to stop her. But she didn't pause. The chapel doors burst open before her desperate push, and she stumbled into the cool evening air. The reception guests who had been waiting in the garden turned in surprise as she appeared, her wedding dress billowing behind her like a white banner of rebellion. She knew the estate's hidden passages from childhood adventures, secret routes through the gardens that the adults had forgotten. Her feet found the familiar path instinctively, leading her away from the lights and voices, away from the life that had been chosen for her. The ancient oak at the garden's edge marked the boundary between civilization and the wild forest beyond. For a moment, she hesitated, looking back at the manor where light spilled from every window, where her old life waited to reclaim her if she chose to return. Then she heard her father's voice calling her name, filled with authority and expectation, and she plunged into the darkness between the trees. The forest swallowed her whole, its ancient embrace both terrifying and liberating. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in silver threads, illuminating patches of moss-covered ground while leaving deep shadows that seemed to shift and breathe with life of their own. Ilara's wedding dress snagged on thorns and low branches, the expensive silk tearing with each desperate step deeper into the wilderness. Her silver locket bounced against her chest as she ran, the small oval containing her mother's portrait, the only piece of Eleanor Whitmore that her father had allowed her to keep. The familiar weight of it provided comfort in this moment of absolute uncertainty, a reminder that she carried love with her even into the unknown. Behind her, she could hear voices calling her name, growing more distant with each passing minute. Torches flickered between the trees like angry fireflies as the search party spread out from the manor, but Ilara knew these woods better than any of them. As a child, she had explored every hidden path and secret grove, finding solace among the trees when the weight of expectations became too heavy to bear. The deeper she ventured, the older the forest became. These were not the carefully maintained woodlands near the estate, but primeval trees that had stood for centuries, their massive trunks scarred by time and weather. The air grew thicker here, charged with something that made her skin prickle and her pulse quicken. It was as if the very atmosphere held secrets, ancient knowledge that whispered just beyond the edge of hearing. A branch cracked somewhere in the darkness to her left, and Ilara froze. The sound was too deliberate, too measured to be caused by wind or settling wood. Something moved in the shadows between the trees, pacing her with patient precision. Her breath came in short gasps as she strained to see what watched her from the darkness. 2 points of light gleamed in the blackness, eyes that reflected the moonlight like polished amber. They were too high off the ground to belong to any ordinary forest creature, and they held an intelligence that made her blood run cold. The eyes studied her with predatory interest, neither advancing nor retreating, simply observing with ancient patience. "Who's there?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, trembling with fear and exhaustion. The eyes blinked once, slowly, then vanished as if they had never been there at all. But Ilara could still feel the weight of that gaze, the sensation of being evaluated by something far older and more dangerous than anything she had ever encountered. She pressed her hand to her mother's locket, drawing strength from the connection to the one person who had truly understood her desire for freedom. Eleanor had died too young, taken by a fever that had swept through the county, but not before planting seeds of rebellion in her daughter's heart. "Be brave, my darling," she used to whisper during their secret midnight conversations. "The world is vast and full of wonders that proper ladies are never supposed to see." The forest path wound deeper into darkness, and Ilara followed it as if drawn by invisible threads. Her feet found sure footing, despite the treacherous roots and scattered stones, as though the earth itself was guiding her steps towards some predetermined destination. The torn remnants of her wedding dress trailed behind, her like ghostly memories of the life she had abandoned. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, not the familiar calls of owls or the rustle of small creatures, but something else entirely. Music, perhaps, or voices singing in a language she didn't recognize. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, pulling at something deep in her soul and drawing her forward despite the rational voice in her mind that warned of danger. The silver locket grew warm against her skin, as if responding to the mysterious energies that permeated this ancient place. She could almost hear her mother's voice carried on the night wind, encouraging her to trust her instincts, to embrace the unknown, rather than flee back to the safety of familiar chains. A clearing opened before her, bathed in moonlight so bright it seemed almost supernatural. In the center stood a circle of standing stones, weathered and moss-covered, clearly predating any human settlement in the area. The air here thrummed with power, making her skin tingle and her hair stand on end. As she stepped into the clearing, Ilara felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon her. This was a place where worlds met, where the boundaries between reality and legend grew thin. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the standing stones, those amber eyes watched and waited. He emerged from the shadows like darkness given form, stepping into the moonlight with fluid grace that defied natural movement. Tall and lean, with midnight black hair that caught the silver light, he possessed the kind of dangerous beauty that belonged in old paintings and darker legends. His clothes were simple but elegant, a black coat that seemed to absorb light, fitted trousers, and boots that made no sound against the moss-covered stones. But it was his eyes that held her captive. The same amber that had watched her from the forest depths, now revealed in a face of sharp angles and aristocratic features. They burned with an inner fire that spoke of centuries of secrets. And when they met hers, Ilara felt something fundamental shift in the world around her. Running from something, little bride. His voice carried the richness of aged wine and barely contained power. There was no threat in his tone, only curious amusement, as if her presence in this sacred place was both unexpected and delightful. Ilara's hand instinctively went to her torn dress, suddenly aware of how she must appear, disheveled, desperate, her carefully arranged hair now wild around her shoulders. "I'm no one's bride," she said, lifting her chin with defiance that surprised them both. A slow smile curved his lips, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp in the moonlight. "Indeed, and yet you wear the costume of surrender." He gestured elegantly at her wedding dress, now streaked with dirt and decorated with thorns. "Though I must say, rebellion suits you far better than submission ever could. You speak as though you know me. Stranger, I know the look of a caged bird finally testing her wings." He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, something wild and intoxicating, like midnight storms and ancient forests. "The question is, little bird, what will you do with your newfound freedom?" There was something hypnotic about his presence, something that made the very air around him shimmer with possibility. Ilara found herself drawn forward, despite every rational instinct warning her to flee. "Who are you? Does it matter?" He reached into his coat and produced a single black rose, its petals so dark they seemed to absorb moonlight. The flower was impossibly perfect, untouched by thorn or blemish, and when he offered it to her, she felt power radiating from its velvet petals. "I am someone who understands the weight of unwanted obligations, someone who believes that freedom is worth any price." She stared at the rose, mesmerized by its unnatural beauty. "Nothing is free. Everything has a cost." Wise words from one so young. His amber eyes sparkled with approval. "But consider this. What is the cost of the life you just abandoned? Years of slow suffocation. Decades of watching your spirit wither until nothing remains but duty and regret?" The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She thought of Lord Hartwell's cold assessment, her father's calculated satisfaction, the endless succession of empty days that would have stretched ahead like prison sentences. The cost would have been everything that made me who I am. Then perhaps, he said softly, extending the rose closer to her trembling fingers, the price of freedom is not so terrible after all. When she took the black rose, electricity shot through her fingers where they touched his. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Not pain, but a jolt of pure energy that seemed to awaken something sleeping in her blood. The flower felt warm in her hands, pulsing with its own heartbeat. What are you? The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. I am choice, he replied, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I am the path not taken, the life unlived, the dreams deemed too dangerous for proper young ladies. He stepped closer still, so near she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, could feel the supernatural heat radiating from his skin. I am what waits beyond the boundaries of your careful, constructed world. And what do you want from me? Nothing you do not wish to give. His hand rose to cup her cheek, fingers cool against her flushed skin. But I offer you something your former life never could, the chance to discover who you truly are when all the chains are broken. The moment stretched between them like a held breath, pregnant with possibility and danger in equal measure. Ilara felt herself balanced on the edge of a precipice, knowing that whatever choice she made in the next heartbeat would change. Everything forever. Show me, she whispered, and then his lips met hers. Ilara awakened to sunlight, filtering through windows that definitely did not belong to her father's estate. The glass was older, thicker, with subtle imperfections that spoke of craftsmanship from a bygone era. She lay in a bed far more comfortable than any she had ever known, surrounded by silk sheets the color of deep wine and pillows that seemed to cradle her like gentle clouds. The crimson cloak draped over the nearby chair caught her attention immediately. It was clearly not hers, made of the finest velvet with silver clasps that gleamed in the morning light. The garment seemed to call to her, as if it had been waiting for her arrival, and when she reached for it, the fabric felt warm beneath her fingers, despite having hung in the cool air. Her wedding dress lay in tatters on the floor, a reminder of the night that had changed everything. But as she sat up, stretching muscles that felt strangely energized despite her ordeal, Ilara realized that more than her circumstances had changed. Her senses seemed sharper somehow. She could hear conversations happening floors below, could smell herbs and spices from what must be a kitchen somewhere in the building, could see dust motes dancing in the air with startling clarity. You're awake. The voice belonged to a young woman about her own age, with auburn hair braided intricately and wearing a dress of midnight blue. She entered carrying a silver tray laden with what appeared to be breakfast. Damien said you might be hungry when you stirred. Damien. The name felt familiar on her tongue, though she couldn't immediately place why. The one who brought you here. The woman set the tray on a small table by the window. I'm Lydia. I suppose you could say I'm the unofficial hostess of this place, at least for newcomers who find themselves adjusting to circumstances. Ilara pulled the crimson cloak around her shoulders, surprised by how perfectly it fit, as if it had been made specifically for her. Where exactly is here? Lydia's smile held secrets that danced in her green eyes. Somewhere between the world you knew and the world you're about to discover. A place where the impossible becomes merely improbable, and where those who don't quite fit in the ordinary realm can find their true purpose. The breakfast on the tray looked normal enough. Fresh bread, honey, fruits that seemed impossibly ripe for the season. But when Ilara bit into an apple, the flavor exploded across her tongue with intensity that made her gasp. Every taste was magnified, as if her entire palate had been awakened from a long sleep. The enhancement takes some getting used to, Lydia observed, settling into the chair across from her. But you'll find that many experiences are richer now, more vivid, more real than anything you knew before. Enhancement? Ilara set down the apple, her heart beginning to race. What do you mean? The kiss, Lydia said gently. When one of our kind shares that kind of connection with a mortal, it begins a process. Nothing irreversible yet, but definitely transformative. Memories of the night before came flooding back, the mysterious stranger with amber eyes, The black rose, the electricity that had passed between them when their lips met. The kiss had tasted of midnight and magic, and she had felt something fundamental shift inside her very soul. "You're kind?" Ilara's voice came out smaller than she intended. Before Lydia could answer, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. The door opened to reveal the man from the forest, though in daylight he looked somehow both more and less dangerous than he had in the moonlit clearing. His dark hair was tied back, revealing the sharp beauty of his features, and he wore simple clothes that nonetheless carried an air of authority. "Damien," Lydia said, rising with what might have been a curtsy. "I was just explaining to our guest about her situation." His amber eyes met Ilara's, and that same electric current passed between them. "And how is our guest handling the explanation?" "I haven't told her everything yet," Lydia admitted. "I thought perhaps you might prefer to handle the more significant revelations yourself." Ilara stood, the crimson cloak falling gracefully around her like it had always belonged there. "Perhaps someone could simply tell me the truth, instead of speaking in riddles around me as if I'm not here." Damien's laugh was rich and genuine. "Direct. I like that." He moved closer but stopped just beyond arm's reach, as if respecting her need for space. "Very well. The truth, then. You are no longer entirely human, Ilara Whitmore. The kiss we shared has begun your transformation into something far more powerful than anything your old world could have offered." The crown that rested on the mantelpiece was unlike anything Ilara had ever seen. Crafted from what appeared to be blackened silver, it was woven with thorns that seemed to grow from the metal itself, each one tipped with a ruby that gleamed like drops of blood. The sight of it made her stomach clench with a mixture of dread and inexplicable recognition, as if some part of her had always known she would one day stand in its presence. "Vampire." Damien said the word quietly, watching her face for any sign of terror or revulsion. "That is what I am. What we are. In this realm beneath the trees where sunlight filters differently and time moves according to older laws." Ilara stared at him, her mind struggling to process information that should have sent her screaming from the room. Instead, she found herself studying his features with new understanding, the two sharp teeth glimpsed when he smiled, the unnatural grace of his movements, the way shadows seemed to bend around him as if acknowledging a master. "Vampire," she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. "Like the creatures in Gothic novels? Monsters who drink blood and fear the cross. Stories written by mortals who caught glimpses of our world and tried to make sense of what they couldn't understand." He moved to the window, gazing out at what she now realized was not forest at all, but an elaborate garden carved from the earth beneath ancient trees. "We are not monsters, Ilara. We are simply more than human, stronger, faster, capable of experiencing centuries instead of mere decades." Lydia stepped forward, her expression gentle but serious. "The kiss you shared has begun the process of transformation. You're connected to our realm now, bound by magic that is older than any kingdom above ground." "Bound how?" Ilara's voice remained steady despite the earthquake happening in her understanding of reality. Damien turned from the window, his amber eyes reflecting depths of experience she was only beginning to fathom. "You can return to your mortal life if you choose. The binding is not yet complete, but you will carry part of our world with you always, the enhanced senses, the longing for something your old existence can never provide. Most find it uncomfortable. And the alternative? You embrace what you are becoming." He gestured toward the crown of thorns, its rubies catching the filtered light. "You join us fully, accept the gifts and responsibilities that come with immortality. You become vampire royalty." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Royalty? I'm king of this realm," Damien said simply. "A title earned through centuries of protecting our people and maintaining the delicate balance between our world and the mortal realm above. And you..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You are my mate, chosen by forces older than conscious thought. The crown awaits its queen," Ilara sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. This is impossible. Yesterday I was a proper English lady, being forced into an unwanted marriage. Today you're telling me I'm destined to be a vampire queen. Destiny is a strong word, Lydia said gently. Choice might be more accurate. The bond between you and Damien is real, but you remain free to decide whether to honor it. What would it mean? Ilara asked, surprised by her own question. She should be demanding to return home, insisting this was all some elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. Instead, she found herself genuinely curious about a future that would have been unimaginable 24 hours ago. Immortality, Damien replied. Power beyond anything mortals can conceive. The ability to shape the world according to your will rather than being shaped by it. But also responsibility to our people, to the ancient laws that govern supernatural realms, to the balance between light and darkness. And the cost? You would leave your mortal life behind completely. No more connection to family, friends, the world you've always known. Some find that loss too great to bear. Ilara thought of her father's cold ambition, Lord Hartwell's calculating assessment, the suffocating expectations that had driven her into the forest. What exactly would she be giving up? A life of managed oppression disguised as privilege. Years of slow spiritual death masquerading as respectability? How long do I have to decide? The transformation will complete itself within 3 days, Damien said. After that, the choice will be made for you by forces beyond any of our control. The crown of thorns seemed to pulse with its own inner light, as if it could sense her thoughts, and was already preparing to accept a new wearer. The leather-bound chronicle felt warm beneath Ilara's fingers as Lydia placed it in her hands, its ancient pages crackling with the weight of centuries. The cover bore symbols that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them, as if the book itself was alive and watching her with patient interest. Every vampire who has ever lived is recorded within these pages, Lydia explained, as they walked through corridors carved from living rock, illuminated by crystals that pulsed with their own inner light. Their histories, their laws, their triumphs and failures. It will help you understand what you're considering becoming part of. The underground realm stretched far beyond anything Ilara had imagined. Vast chambers opened into gardens where impossible flowers bloomed in perpetual twilight, their petals glowing with bioluminescent beauty. Waterfalls cascaded from heights lost in shadow, their music echoing through halls that could have housed cathedrals. This was not the dank cave system she might have expected, but a carefully crafted civilization that had existed for millennia beneath the notice of the mortal world. How many of you are there? Ilara asked as they passed a group of elegantly dressed individuals who bowed respectfully when they noticed her presence. Several hundred in this realm alone, Lydia replied. Though vampire communities exist throughout the world, hidden in places where the boundaries between dimensions grow thin. We are not numerous, but we are influential. They entered a vast library where books lined walls that stretched beyond sight, their spines glowing softly in languages Ilara couldn't identify. Vampires moved among the stacks with quiet purpose, some appearing no older than herself, while others carried themselves with the gravitas of extreme age. All possessed the same otherworldly beauty and fluid grace that marked Damien, though none commanded quite the same aura of power. The hierarchy is complex. Lydia continued, noting Ilara's curious observations. Age brings wisdom and influence, but not necessarily authority. Leadership must be earned through strength, intelligence, and the ability to protect our people from threats both mortal and supernatural. A woman approached them, her silver hair braided with gems that caught the crystal light. Despite her apparent youth, her eyes held depths that spoke of centuries. When she curtsied to Ilara, the gesture carried genuine respect rather than mere politeness. "Lady Ilara," the woman said, her accent carrying hints of languages long dead. "I am Seraphina, keeper of our historical records. Damien has asked me to answer any questions you might have about our laws and customs. I'm not a lady, Ilara protested, uncomfortable with the title. I'm just someone trying to understand what's happening to her. Serafina's smile was both knowing and kind. In our world, titles are earned rather than inherited. But the bond you share with our king automatically grants you status here. Regardless of your mortal origins, they settled into chairs, arranged around a table where the chronicle lay open, its pages revealing intricate illustrations of vampire courts throughout history. Ilara studied images of magnificent ceremonies, ancient battles, and figures whose beauty transcended human understanding. "What are the laws that govern all of this?" she asked, running her finger along text written in script that seemed to translate itself as she read. "Secrecy above all," Serafina explained. "Our survival depends on remaining hidden from mortal detection. We feed carefully, selectively, never taking enough to cause death or suspicion. We protect the balance between our realm and theirs. Feed." Ilara's stomach clenched. "Blood is life to us," Lydia said gently. "But it need not mean death to others. We have learned to take what we need without causing harm, often from those who give willingly in exchange for the euphoric experiences our bite can provide." The chronicle showed images of vampires living alongside mortals throughout history, as physicians, artists, scholars, using their enhanced abilities to advance human knowledge while remaining carefully concealed. They were not the savage monsters of legend, but beings who had learned to channel their predatory nature into more constructive pursuits. "And if someone breaks these laws?" Ilara asked. Serafina's expression grew grave. "Justice is swift and absolute. We cannot afford rogues who threaten our carefully maintained secrecy. Damien's role as king includes serving as final arbiter in such matters." The weight of responsibility inherent in royal vampire status was beginning to make itself clear. This was not simply about personal transformation, but about becoming guardian of an entire hidden civilization. A soft chime echoed through the library, and Lydia rose gracefully. "The evening council is beginning. Damien thought you might wish to observe how decisions are made here." As they prepared to leave the library, Ilara clutched the chronicle tighter, feeling the knowledge within its pages settling into her consciousness like sediment in still water. The crystal pendant hung from a delicate silver chain, its faceted surface catching light from sources that seemed to exist within the stone itself. When Damien placed it around her neck, Ilara felt a surge of connection that extended far beyond the physical realm. Suddenly she could sense the emotions of every vampire in the surrounding chambers, their thoughts brushing against her consciousness like whispered secrets. "This will allow you to communicate with our realm no matter where you are," he explained, his fingers lingering at the base of her throat where the pendant rested. "But more importantly, it will protect you from forces that would seek to harm someone caught between worlds." They stood in his private chambers, a space that reflected centuries of collected beauty. Tapestries from civilizations long fallen adorned the walls, and artifacts that would have made museum curators weep with envy rested casually on tables and shelves. Yet despite the obvious wealth and power on display, the room felt surprisingly intimate, as if Damien had chosen each piece for personal meaning, rather than mere ostentation. "The price of my freedom," Ilara said, running her fingers along the pendant's smooth surface. "It's not just leaving my old life behind, is it? It's accepting that I can never go back to being simply human." "No," he agreed, settling into a chair across from her. "The transformation, once complete, is irreversible. You would possess strength that could crush stone, speed that would make you invisible to mortal eyes, senses that reveal truth hidden beneath layers of deception. But you would also carry the hunger that drives all our kind, the hunger for blood, among other things." His amber eyes held depths she was still learning to navigate. "We hunger for experience, for beauty, for connections that span centuries rather than mere decades. Some find the intensity overwhelming. Ilara thought of the muted existence she had lived until now, emotions carefully controlled, desires systematically suppressed, every day a careful performance of acceptable femininity. The idea of experiencing life with supernatural intensity was both terrifying and irresistibly appealing. What happens if I choose to return to my mortal life? You would retain some enhancements, the heightened senses, increased strength, extended lifespan. But you would also carry an eternal restlessness, a knowing that you had touched something extraordinary and chosen to walk away from it. Many who make that choice find their mortal lives insufficient. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Lydia entered, her usually composed expression troubled. "Damien, there are riders approaching the forest border. They carry torches and silver weapons. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees." Damien rose with fluid grace, but Ilara caught the flash of something dangerous in his eyes. "How many?" "At least a dozen. They're being led by two men in fine clothes, one older, one younger. The older one shouts a woman's name." Ilara's blood turned to ice. "My father and Lord Hartwell." "They're hunting you," Damien said, his voice carrying new edge. "Silver weapons suggest they know exactly what they're hunting." The implications hit her like a physical blow. Her escape had not gone unnoticed, and somehow her absence had been connected to supernatural forces. The rational world she had known was colliding violently with the magical realm she was discovering. How could they know? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. "Vampire hunters have existed as long as we have," Lydia explained grimly. "Mortals who dedicate their lives to tracking and eliminating our kind. Your father may have consulted with such individuals when traditional search methods failed. They cannot enter our realm uninvited," Damien said, moving to a window that looked out onto the forest above. "But they can make the surrounding area extremely dangerous for anyone attempting to travel between worlds." Ilara joined him at the window, watching torchlights move between the trees like angry stars. The men searching for her were not simply concerned family members. They were armed for supernatural war, prepared to destroy anything that stood between them and their goal of dragging her back to the life she had rejected. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I've brought danger to your people. You've brought choice," Damien corrected, his hand finding hers. "The same choice you faced yesterday, but with higher stakes. You can attempt to return to them, try to convince them you left of your own free will and that no supernatural influence was involved." "They wouldn't believe me." "No," he agreed. "They wouldn't, which means your only real choice is to embrace what you're becoming and help us protect this realm from those who would destroy it." The crystal pendant grew warm against her skin, pulsing with energy that seemed to respond to the approach of danger. The silver dagger gleamed with malevolent purpose in the torchlight, its blade etched with symbols that made Ilara's new supernatural senses recoil in instinctive fear. Lord Hartwell held the weapon with the familiarity of long practice, his cold demeanor now revealing itself as something far more dangerous than mere social calculation. "She's in there somewhere," he told the assembled hunters, his voice carrying across the night air to where Ilara crouched behind ancient standing stones. "The creature has taken her into its lair, but we know the ways to draw them out." Her father stood beside him, no longer the composed businessman who had arranged her marriage, but rather a man consumed by desperate fury. "Do whatever is necessary to retrieve my daughter. I will not have the Whitmore name tainted by association with unholy creatures." The hunting party consisted of men she didn't recognize, all armed with weapons that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Silver blades, wooden stakes, vials of what appeared to be holy water. They had come prepared for supernatural war. But it was the confident way Lord Hartwell directed their preparations that chilled her most. "This was not his first such expedition. How long have you known?" she whispered to Damien, who crouched beside her in the shadows. "About vampire hunters, about Lord Hartwell?" "Centuries," he replied grimly. "The Hartwell family has been hunting our kind for generations, passing down knowledge and weapons through bloodlines sworn to our destruction. Your engagement was no coincidence, Ilara. He suspected what you might become long before you knew it yourself. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Every interaction with her intended husband took on new meaning. His cold assessment of her value, his insistence on immediate marriage, his casual dismissal of her wishes. He had not been acquiring a wife, but setting a trap, using her as bait to lure supernatural forces into the open. The signs were subtle, Damien continued. His amber eyes never leaving the hunter's movements. Enhanced intuition, unusual empathy, the ability to sense things others missed. Humans with potential for transformation often display such traits years before their first supernatural encounter. And you knew this when you kissed me? I recognized what you could become, yes, but the choice was still yours to make. One of the hunters produced a device that looked like a compass crossed with a church bell, its needle spinning wildly before settling in the direction of the hidden realm entrance. Lord Hartwell smiled with cold satisfaction as he consulted the instrument. The sanctified silver is reacting to their presence, he announced. Spread out and begin the ritual circles. We'll smoke them out like the vermin they are. The hunters moved with practiced efficiency, arranging themselves around the forest clearing where Ilara had first encountered Damien. They began chanting in Latin, their voices weaving together into a sound that made her enhanced hearing ache with its discordant harmony. Whatever they were attempting, the very air seemed to resist their efforts. Banishment ritual, Seraphina whispered, appearing beside them with several other vampires Ilara was beginning to recognize. They're trying to seal the entrance to our realm permanently. Can they do that? Ilara asked, though the answer was written in the grim expressions around her. If they complete the ritual, yes, Damien replied. Our people would be trapped below indefinitely, cut off from the surface world entirely. Eventually, the realm would begin to collapse without its connection to the living earth above. The crystal pendant around her neck grew hot against her skin, its protective energies responding to the increasing supernatural tension. Through its power, she could sense the fear and anger of the vampire community, beings who had lived for centuries, suddenly facing the possibility of extinction. There has to be something we can do, she said, surprised by the determination in her own voice. There is, Damien said quietly. But it would require you to make your choice about transformation now, tonight. With no more time for contemplation, Lord Hartwell's voice rose above the chanting, calling out with the confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Ilara Whitmore, I know you can hear me. Come out now, and this can end without further bloodshed. Your father simply wants his daughter back, and I am prepared to honor our engagement despite your temporary madness. The lie in his words was obvious to her enhanced senses, but what struck her most was the realization that she felt no temptation to believe him. The woman who had fled into the forest 2 nights ago might have been swayed by promises of forgiveness and returned to familiar safety. The person she was becoming recognized those promises as poison wrapped in silk. The poisoned chalice sat innocuously on the stone table in the council chamber, its ornate silver surface gleaming with deceptive beauty. Ilara stared at it in horror, as Seraphina explained what they had discovered through careful investigation of the hunting party's preparations. Marcus provided it, the keeper of records said, her voice heavy with betrayal. One of our own, someone we trusted with access to our most sacred spaces. He added the blessed silver dust to the ceremonial wine that Damien was meant to drink during tonight's emergency council meeting. The vampire in question stood at the far end of the chamber, his once handsome face now twisted with defiance and something that might have been shame. Marcus had served as one of Damien's advisors for nearly 50 years, his loyalty never questioned until this moment of ultimate treachery. Why? Damien's voice carried the weight of centuries of disappointment, though his amber eyes burned with carefully controlled fury. What did they offer you that could be worth betraying your own kind? Freedom, Marcus spat, his fangs extended in a display of aggression that fooled no one. Freedom from hiding, from skulking in shadows while mortals destroy the world above. The hunters promised me a place in their new order, where vampires who prove their loyalty to humanity would be allowed to exist openly. And you believed them? Lydia's voice carried incredulous disgust. You believed that those who have spent generations trying to exterminate us would suddenly welcome converts. Marcus's laugh was bitter and broken. I believed anything was better than watching our realm slowly decay while our king falls in love with some mortal child who understands nothing of what she's stumbling into. The words hit Ilara like physical blows, each one designed to wound. But what surprised her was the anger that rose in response, not hurt or shame, but genuine fury at seeing Damien's trust betrayed by someone he had considered family. How long have you been feeding them information? She asked, stepping forward despite Lydia's restraining hand on her arm. Long enough, Marcus replied with sneering satisfaction. They know about our defenses, our numbers, the location of our most sacred artifacts. They know that our precious king's power wanes when he's distracted by thoughts of his mortal plaything. The insult was clearly intended to provoke a reaction, and it succeeded beyond Marcus's expectations. But instead of the tearful retreat he seemed to anticipate, Ilara felt something wild and dangerous unfurl in her chest. The transformation Damien had described was accelerating, triggered by intense emotion and the need to protect what had become precious to her. Enough, Damien said quietly, but his voice carried absolute authority. You have confessed to treason against your own kind, Marcus. You know the penalty. I welcome it, Marcus snarled. Death is preferable to watching our proud race reduced to lovesick fools, mooning over mortal. He never finished the sentence. Ilara moved faster than her still human mind could process, crossing the chamber in a blur of motion that surprised everyone present, including herself. Her hand closed around Marcus's throat with strength she didn't know she possessed, lifting him from the ground with effortless ease. You will not speak of him that way, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from some deeper source than her human vocal cords. And you will not threaten people who have shown me more kindness in 3 days than I received in 22 years of mortal life. The room fell silent, except for Marcus's strangled attempts to breathe. His eyes widened with something that might have been recognition as he stared into Ilara's face, seeing something there that hadn't existed moments before. Ilara, Damien said gently, release him. This is not your burden to bear. She looked at him over Marcus's struggling form, her enhanced senses picking up the complex mix of emotions radiating from her king. Pride, concern, love, and something else. Hope that she was becoming exactly what their realm needed, isn't it? She asked, though she lowered Marcus to the ground and stepped back. If I'm to be queen of this realm, shouldn't its protection be exactly my burden to bear? The poisoned chalice caught the crystal light as it sat forgotten on the table, its deadly contents serving as a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. But what struck Ilara most was the realization that she no longer thought of it as their realm or his people. Somewhere in the span of a few heartbeats, it had become hers to defend as well. Marcus collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath that no longer seemed quite adequate. When he looked up at her again, the defiance in his eyes had been replaced by something much more primitive. The moonstone ring had appeared on her finger without her conscious awareness, its pale surface reflecting the phases of the moon despite being worn underground. Ilara stared at it in wonder as Damien guided her through the aftermath of her confrontation with Marcus. Her body still humming with power she was only beginning to understand. When did this happen? She asked, holding up her hand to examine the ring more closely. The stone seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, synchronized perfectly with her own enhanced circulation. When you defended our realm from Marcus's treachery, Damien replied, gently cleaning silver-tainted blood from a wound on his arm where the traitor's desperate final attack had connected. The ring appears when a potential queen proves her commitment through action rather than words. The injury worried her more than it should have, given that vampire healing capabilities far exceeded anything mortal. But the silver dust Marcus had concealed in his clothing was designed specifically to slow supernatural recovery. And the wound showed no signs of closing, despite Damien's normally perfect regeneration. "You're not healing," she observed, her enhanced senses picking up subtle signs of distress he was trying to hide. "Silver poisoning takes time to work through the system," he said dismissively, though she could hear the lie in his voice. "It's nothing that rest won't cure." But Ilara's transformed instincts told her otherwise. The wound was deeper than it appeared, and whatever Marcus had managed to inject into Damien's bloodstream was designed to do more than simply slow healing. The treacherous vampire had been prepared for the possibility of exposure, carrying weapons that could inflict lasting damage even on someone of Damien's power. "There's something you're not telling me," she said, moving closer to examine the wound, despite his attempts to deflect her attention. "The silver was blessed by hunter priests," Lydia said quietly from the doorway, her expression grave. "It carries properties that prevent normal vampire healing. Without proper treatment, the wound will continue to spread until what?" Ilara demanded when the other woman's voice trailed off. "Until his heart stops," Damien finished matter-of-factly. "Though that process takes several hours, which gives us time to focus on more pressing concerns. The hunters are still performing their banishment ritual, and Marcus's betrayal has given them detailed knowledge of our defenses." The casual way he discussed his own potential death sparked something fierce in Ilara's chest. The moonstone ring grew warm against her skin as her emotional state shifted into territory she had never experienced as a mortal. This was not the polite concern appropriate to her former social station, but something far more primal and possessive. "No," she said firmly. "We're going to heal you first, then deal with the hunters. Ilara, the ritual must be stopped before what? Before I lose you?" The words came out with more intensity than she had intended, carrying harmonics that made the crystal walls around them resonate in sympathy. "I just found you, Damien. I just found myself. I will not watch you die from some coward's poison while there are solutions available. The only cure requires a complete blood exchange," Lydia explained reluctantly. "Someone would need to drain him completely, then refill his system with untainted blood. But the process is extremely dangerous for both parties, especially for someone still completing their own transformation." Ilara felt the moonstone ring pulse as understanding dawned. "Someone like me?" "Someone exactly like you," Damien corrected, his amber eyes holding depths of emotion she was still learning to read. "But the risk is mine to take." She moved to the ancient chest where vampire medical supplies were stored, her hands finding the instruments she needed with instinctive knowledge. "Tell me what to do. Ilara, if something goes wrong during the process, you could die. Or worse, you could survive but lose your humanity entirely, becoming something driven only by hunger and rage. And if I do nothing, you die, and this realm falls to hunters who will exterminate everyone I've come to care about." She met his gaze steadily, her decision crystallizing with the clarity that came from enhanced supernatural senses. "That's not really a choice at all." The moonstone ring flared with brilliant light as she spoke, its power responding to the depth of her commitment. Through the crystal pendant, she could sense the approval of the vampire community, their recognition that she was no longer the frightened mortal who had fled into the forest, but someone willing to risk everything for those she had chosen to protect. "Then we begin immediately," Damien said, settling onto the ritual table with the resigned grace of someone who had faced death before. "But Ilara, if the process starts to consume you, if you feel yourself losing control, you must stop. Promise me." She took his hand, feeling the weakness that was spreading through his system like slow poison. "I promise to save you," she said. "Everything else is negotiable." The battle standard of the vampire realm snapped in the wind above the forest clearing. its deep crimson fabric emblazoned with symbols that seemed to move and shift in the torchlight. Ilara stood beneath it, her transformation now complete, feeling the weight of her new nature settle into bones that had become something more than human. The successful blood exchange had saved Damien's life, but it had also accelerated her change beyond anything they had anticipated. "Form defensive lines around the sacred grove," Damien commanded, his voice carrying to every vampire warrior positioned throughout the trees. The silver poisoning had been purged from his system, leaving him stronger than before. But Ilara could sense his concern for what the night would cost them all. The hunters had grown desperate as their banishment ritual failed to achieve its intended effect. Lord Hartwell's carefully laid plans were crumbling, as the vampires proved more resilient and better organized than his intelligence had suggested. In response, he had escalated to direct assault, bringing his forces into the forest with weapons designed for mass destruction rather than subtle elimination. "They have fire," Serafina reported, her ancient eyes reflecting centuries of experience with mortal warfare. "Enchanted flames that will burn even our stone dwellings. They mean to destroy the realm entirely, rather than simply seal it." Ilara felt rage building in her chest, not the hot anger of her mortal days, but something colder and far more dangerous. These men sought to destroy not just her newfound home, but everyone she had come to love. The vampire community that had welcomed her, protected her, taught her what it meant to belong somewhere without pretense or performance. "My lady," one of the younger vampires approached with obvious nervousness, "your father and Lord Hartwell have demanded to speak with you before the fighting begins. They claim they have an offer that might avoid bloodshed." She exchanged glances with Damien, both of them understanding that this was likely another trap. But the possibility of ending the conflict without massive casualties was too important to ignore, especially given the hunters' apparent willingness to escalate beyond all reason. "I'll hear them," she decided, but not alone. The meeting took place in the clearing where she had first encountered Damien, now illuminated by hunter torches that cast harsh shadows among the ancient trees. Her father stood with Lord Hartwell and a handful of their most experienced fighters, all armed with weapons that gleamed with sanctified silver. "Ilara," her father's voice carried none of the warmth she remembered from childhood, only cold calculation and barely contained fury. "You look different," she supposed she did. The transformation had sharpened her features, enhanced her natural beauty to supernatural levels, and given her an aura of power that no mortal could mistake for mere charisma. When she moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator, and when she smiled, her new fangs were clearly visible. "I am different," she replied simply. "I'm free." "You're damned," Lord Hartwell interjected, his hand resting on the silver dagger at his belt. "But redemption is still possible. Come with us willingly, submit to purification rituals, and your soul can yet be saved." "Purification?" The word tasted bitter on her enhanced palate. "You mean torture designed to break my connection to this realm and everyone in it?" "I mean salvation from the monster you've become," he said with the fervor of a true believer. "The creature that seduced you has twisted your mind, made you believe that damnation is freedom. But we can restore your humanity, cleanse the supernatural taint from your blood, and if I refuse—" Her father stepped forward, his expression harder than she had ever seen it. "Then you are no daughter of mine, and we will treat you as we would any other supernatural threat to decent society." The ultimatum hung in the air between them, and Ilara felt the moment crystallize around her like frost forming on glass. This was the final choice, not between mortality and transformation, but between the family that had never truly accepted her and the realm that had welcomed her completely. "I see," she said quietly, then raised her voice so it would carry to both sides of the gathering conflict. "Then let me be clear about my own position. I am Ilara, queen of the vampire realm, protector of these people and guardian of this land. Any who threaten what is mine will face the consequences of that choice." Lord Hartwell's smile was cold and satisfied. "Then you have chosen damnation over redemption." So be it. The battle standards snapped again in the wind above them, and Dilara felt the weight of command settle onto her shoulders like a royal mantle. The heart-shaped amulet pulsed with warm light against Dilara's chest as she knelt beside Damien's still form, his blood soaking into the forest floor where Lord Hartwell's enchanted blade had found its mark. The weapon had been designed specifically to wound vampire royalty, its blessed. Silver core wrapped in spells that prevented healing and slowly drained supernatural life force. "How long does he have?" she asked Lydia, who worked frantically over potions and healing salves that seemed pitifully inadequate against such a deliberately crafted injury. "Hours, perhaps less," came the grim reply. The blade was meant to kill slowly, to cause maximum suffering before death. Only a complete soul bond could channel enough life force to counteract its effects. A soul bond? The final stage of vampire transformation, Serafina explained, her ancient hands weaving protective spells around Damien's unconscious form. A permanent joining of life forces that creates shared immortality. But the ritual requires both parties to surrender their individual existence and emerge as something new. Ilara stared down at Damien's pale face, watching the subtle signs of life growing weaker with each passing moment. The battle raged around them as vampire warriors held back the hunters' advance, but she knew their defenses would eventually crumble without their king's leadership. More importantly, she couldn't bear the thought of losing him just as she had finally found the courage to love without reservation. "What are the risks?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be irrelevant to her decision. "For him, there are none beyond what he already faces," Lydia said quietly. "For you, the risk is total loss of your former self. The woman who fled her wedding 3 nights ago would cease to exist entirely, replaced by something that has never been human and never could be. And if it fails, you both die," Serafina said with brutal honesty. "But if you do nothing, he dies anyway, and you live with the knowledge that you chose safety over love." The heart-shaped amulet grew warmer as Ilara made her decision, its ancient magic responding to the depth of her commitment. Around them, the sounds of battle grew closer as the vampire defenses were slowly overwhelmed by superior numbers and weapons designed specifically for supernatural warfare. "Tell me what I need to do," she said, taking Damien's cold hand in both of hers. The ritual itself was surprisingly simple in its requirements, if not in its consequences. No elaborate ceremonies or arcane components, simply the willingness to pour her entire being into saving someone she loved more than her own existence. Ilara placed her hands over the wound, feeling the malevolent energy of the enchanted blade fighting against her touch. "I offer my life for his," she whispered, the ancient words flowing from some deep knowledge she hadn't known she possessed. "I offer my soul to join with his, my strength to become his strength, my future to intertwine with his across all the centuries to come." Power flowed out of her like water from a broken dam, carrying with it every memory of her mortal existence. She felt her childhood fade to distant echoes, her human fears and limitations dissolving into something vast and limitless. The woman who had stood at the altar in her father's chapel became a shadow, replaced by someone who had been born in darkness and moonlight. But with the loss came gain beyond imagining. She felt Damien's consciousness merge with hers, his centuries of experience and wisdom becoming part of her expanded awareness. His love for her, revealed in all its desperate intensity, filled spaces in her heart she hadn't known were empty. And his power, the accumulated strength of vampire, royalty, flowed into her transformed, being like lightning finding its ground. The enchanted blade's malevolent energy shattered against their combined will, its carefully crafted spells proving inadequate against the force of 2 souls choosing to become one. The wound began to heal with supernatural speed, silver poison burning away before the pure fire of their connection. Damien's eyes opened, No longer the amber she remembered, but something deeper and more complex. A color that reflected both their natures combined into something entirely new. When he looked at her, she saw her own transformation reflected in his gaze. No longer human, no longer quite vampire as the term had previously been understood, but something that transcended both states. Ilara. His voice carried harmonics that resonated in her bones. "Not anymore," she replied, helping him sit up as their shared strength coursed through both their forms. "We are something new now, something that has never existed before." The heart-shaped amulet flared with brilliant light, its purpose fulfilled in ways its creators had never imagined. The obsidian tiara felt weightless upon her brow, despite its obvious substance, the black stone seeming to absorb light while somehow making her more luminous. Ilara stood before the assembled vampire court, no longer the uncertain young woman who had stumbled into their world, but a queen who commanded respect through power earned rather than inherited. "By the ancient laws of our realm," Serafina intoned, her voice carrying the weight of ceremony performed countless times across the centuries. "I crown thee Ilara, first queen of the soul-bonded, protector of the hidden realm, guardian of the balance between worlds." The crown settled into place with a sensation like coming home, its magic recognizing her transformed nature and responding with approval that rippled through the assembled crowd. Every vampire present could feel the shift in power dynamics, the way reality itself seemed to bend slightly around their new royal pair. Damien stood beside her, wearing a crown of black silver that matched her obsidian tiara, their soul bond making them appear as two aspects of the same divine entity. The hunter's assault had been repelled, but not without cost. Several young vampires had been lost to enchanted weapons, and the forest above bore scars that would take decades to heal. "Your Majesty," Lord Thaddeus, one of the eldest vampires in the realm, approached with the formal deference due to royalty, but his ancient eyes held curiosity alongside respect. "The soul bond you and King Damien share. It's unlike anything recorded in our histories. What does this mean for our people?" It was a valid question, and one Ilara found herself uniquely qualified to answer. The transformation had left her with access to knowledge that seemed to come from sources beyond individual experience, the accumulated wisdom of every vampire who had ever lived, filtered through her enhanced consciousness. "It means we evolve," she replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal walls resonate in sympathy. "For too long, our kind has remained static, bound by traditions that served us well in simpler times, but limit our potential now. The soul bond allows us to grow beyond those constraints." "What kind of growth?" Lydia asked, genuine curiosity overcoming court protocol. Ilara gestured to the assembled crowd, her enhanced senses reading the emotional undercurrents of every individual present. "Look around you. We are survivors, refugees, beings forced to hide our true nature from a world that fears what it doesn't understand. But what if we didn't have to hide anymore? What if we could find ways to coexist with mortals that benefit both species?" Murmurs of surprise and concern rippled through the crowd. The idea of open coexistence with humans was so revolutionary as to border on heretical in vampire society. Their survival had depended on secrecy for millennia. The suggestion of abandoning that fundamental principle struck many as dangerously naive. "The hunters proved that our secrecy is already compromised," Damien added, his voice blending with hers in perfect harmony. "They knew our locations, our weaknesses, our numbers. Hiding has become a strategy of diminishing returns, but open existence would mean—" Serafina's voice trailed off as she contemplated the implications. "Change," Ilara finished. "Difficult, frightening, necessary change. The world above is transforming faster than ever before. If we don't adapt with it, we'll find ourselves extinct within a few centuries, regardless of how well we hide." She moved through the crowd, her presence seeming to calm fears and inspire confidence in equal measure. The obsidian tiara allowed her to sense the deep concerns of her people, to understand their hopes and terrors with supernatural clarity. I'm not suggesting we abandon caution or reveal ourselves recklessly, she continued. But we can begin building bridges with mortals who might accept us, starting with those who already know supernatural forces exist: scholars, artists, others who live on the margins of conventional society, and those who would still seek to destroy us. Lord Thaddeus asked. We deal with them as we always have, Damien replied, his tone carrying iron beneath its silk, but from a position of strength rather than hiding. The soul bond has given us abilities that no individual vampire has ever possessed. We can protect our people more effectively than any previous generation of rulers. The coronation ceremony continued with oaths of loyalty and ancient rituals, but Ilara found her attention drawn to the younger vampires in the crowd. They watched her with expressions of hope that reminded her painfully of her own face in mirrors during her mortal years, the look of someone desperate for a different kind of future. Change begins now, she announced as the formal ceremonies concluded. Tonight we start building the world we want to live in, rather than simply surviving in the one we inherited. The obsidian tiara pulsed with warm approval, its ancient magic recognizing the dawn of a new era in vampire history. The peace treaty scroll unfurled across the mahogany table like a map to an uncertain future, its parchment bearing seals from representatives of both the mortal and supernatural worlds. Ilara studied the careful wording that had taken weeks to negotiate, each phrase a delicate balance between protection and revelation, secrecy and openness. Article 7 concerns me, Professor Blackwood admitted, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed the document once more. The elderly scholar had been among the first mortals to respond positively to their overtures, his decades of folklore research having prepared him for the reality of vampire existence. The provision for controlled revelation could be interpreted too broadly by either side. Damien leaned forward, his finger tracing the problematic passage. The language was necessarily vague to allow for gradual disclosure. We cannot risk exposing our entire community to potential persecution, but we also cannot build meaningful cooperation based on partial truths. The negotiations had been more complex than Ilara had initially anticipated. While some mortals proved surprisingly accepting of supernatural reality, others had responded with fear that bordered on hysteria. 3 separate attempts at dialogue had been sabotaged by extremist groups on both sides, vampires who refused to abandon centuries of secrecy, and humans who saw any coexistence as betrayal of their species. Perhaps we could establish a trial period, suggested Dr. Helena Martinez, representing a small group of medical researchers who had shown interest in vampire physiology. Limited cooperation on specific projects, with full disclosure reserved for participants who prove themselves trustworthy. Sarah, Ilara's former lady's maid, sat quietly at the table's far end, still adjusting to her role as liaison between the vampire realm and the mortal world. Her acceptance of supernatural reality had been eased by her existing loyalty to Ilara, but even she struggled with the implications of what they were attempting. "What about enforcement?" she asked, her practical nature cutting through the philosophical discussions. If someone violates the treaty, who judges them, and what are the consequences? It was the question that had stalled negotiations for days. Traditional mortal justice systems had no framework for dealing with supernatural infractions, while vampire law had been designed for internal community regulation rather than interspecies cooperation. Joint tribunals, Ilara suggested, the solution coming to her with the clarity that had become familiar since her transformation. 3 judges for any violation, 1 vampire, 1 mortal, 1 selected from neutral supernatural communities that exist outside our immediate sphere. Neutral supernatural communities. Professor Blackwood's eyebrows rose with scholarly interest. Are you suggesting there are others beyond vampires? Damien and Ilara exchanged glances, their soul bond allowing instant communication about how much to reveal. The world is far more complex than either humans or vampires typically acknowledge, Damien said carefully. But such revelations should perhaps wait until we've successfully managed cooperation between our two species. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, reminding everyone present that vampires were no longer confined to darkness, another adaptation that their enhanced abilities had made possible. Ilara felt the warmth on her skin without discomfort, her transformed nature having transcended many traditional limitations. "I believe we're as ready as we can be," Dr. Martinez announced, reviewing her notes from the extended negotiations. The medical exchange program alone could revolutionize treatment for dozens of conditions. Vampire healing abilities, combined with mortal research techniques, could benefit both species enormously. But even as they prepared to sign the historic document, Ilara sensed undercurrents of resistance from unexpected quarters. Her enhanced perceptions picked up tension radiating from Sarah, whose thoughts were more troubled than her composed exterior suggested. "Sarah," she said gently, "you've been quiet today. Are you having doubts about this arrangement?" The young woman looked up with eyes that held shadows of fear, despite her obvious loyalty. "It's not doubts exactly. It's more, I keep thinking about the people back home, in the village where I grew up. Simple folk who believe in things being the way they've always been. How do we tell them that monsters from fairy tales are real, but also that they're not really monsters?" "We start small," Ilara replied, understanding the concern better than most. "With people who are already open to change, who have reasons to benefit from cooperation. We prove that coexistence works before we ask anyone to simply take it on faith." The peace treaty scroll waited patiently for signatures, its carefully crafted articles representing months of hope, compromise, and careful diplomacy. But as Ilara reached for the quill, she realized that signing the document would be the easy part compared to the years of patient work required to make its promises reality. The phoenix feather arrived at dawn, its iridescent plumes shifting between gold and crimson as ancient magic pulsed through its delicate structure. Ilara held it carefully, understanding that its appearance could only mean one thing. The old powers were stirring, threatened by the changes she and Damien had set in motion throughout the supernatural world. "The Council of Shadows has declared you both illegitimate," Seraphina announced grimly, translating the symbolic message that had accompanied the feather. "They claim that soul-bonded vampires are an abomination that threatens the natural order. They're demanding your abdication within 3 days, or they'll invoke ancient laws to remove you by force." Damien studied the feather with the careful attention of someone who had navigated supernatural politics for centuries. "How many of the old families have joined them?" 7 of the 12, came the reluctant reply. "Houses that have ruled vampire enclaves across Europe and Asia for millennia. They see your partnership with mortals as betrayal of everything our kind represents." Ilara felt the familiar surge of protective anger that had become her signature since the transformation. But now it was tempered by wisdom gained through months of governing, understanding that emotional responses alone would not solve problems of this magnitude. "Let me guess," she said, setting the phoenix feather on the table where its magic continued to shimmer. "They object not just to our mortal alliance, but to the very existence of soul-bonded royalty. We represent change they can't control or predict." "More than that," Lydia added, entering the council chamber with reports from their spy network. "They've been in contact with surviving hunter organizations. There are rumors of an alliance between traditional vampires and mortals who share their desire to eliminate progressive supernatural elements." The irony was not lost on anyone present. Vampires and humans who had been enemies for centuries were now considering cooperation, but only to destroy vampires and humans who sought a different kind of cooperation entirely. "Fascinating," Damien mused, though his tone carried no humor. "Fear of change makes for strange bedfellows indeed. What forces can they muster?" "Substantial ones," Seraphina admitted. The Council commands loyalty from vampire populations that dwarf our own numbers. And the hunter families they're courting have access to weapons and resources we've only begun to understand. Ilara moved to the great window that looked out over their transformed realm, where vampire and mortal researchers now worked side by side in laboratories that would have been unimaginable just months ago. Children from both species played together in gardens designed to flourish in perpetual twilight, their laughter a testament to possibilities the Council of Shadows sought to destroy. "They're afraid," she said quietly, understanding crystallizing as she watched the life they had built together, not just of change but of being proven wrong. If our experiment succeeds, it demonstrates that their centuries of rigid separation were unnecessary. Their entire identity is built on the premise that vampires and mortals can never truly coexist. "Fear makes them dangerous," Damien warned, joining her at the window. "Desperate beings with nothing left to lose will take risks that rational opponents would never consider." A commotion in the courtyard below drew their attention. Marcus, the former traitor who had slowly earned a chance at redemption through months of faithful service, was engaged in animated conversation with a group of young vampires who had never known any existence other than the integrated community Ilara and Damien had created. "Your Majesties," he called up to the window, his voice carrying new confidence. "There's something you should know. Word of the Council's ultimatum has spread throughout the realm, and the response, well, perhaps you should hear it for yourselves." Within the hour, the great hall filled with vampires, mortals, and even a few beings that defied easy classification. Professor Blackwood stood beside vampires who had become his research partners. Dr. Martinez shared space with ancient beings whose knowledge had advanced her medical work by centuries. Sarah, now fluent in 3 supernatural languages, served as translator for discussions that would have been impossible before the peace treaty. "We know about the Council's demands," announced Lord Thaddeus, speaking for the assembled crowd. "And we have a response of our own. We stand with you, regardless of the consequences. The old ways brought us centuries of hiding and stagnation. The new ways have given us hope." The phoenix feather on the council table flared with brilliant light, its magic responding to the collective will of those gathered. But Ilara sensed that this was only the beginning. The real test would come when ancient powers moved beyond ultimatums to direct action. The eternal flame danced in its crystal chalice, its light neither growing nor diminishing, despite having burned continuously for 3 years since Ilara's coronation. She stood before it in the early hours of dawn, reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a desperate bride fleeing an unwanted wedding to a queen who had fundamentally altered the relationship between 2 species. The Council of Shadows had been defeated, though not without cost. Their attempt to destroy the integrated realm had lasted months, requiring alliances Ilara had never imagined and sacrifices that still ached in quiet moments. But from their conflict had emerged something unprecedented, a supernatural community that spanned continents, united not by species, but by shared vision of what the future could hold. "Still worrying about whether we made the right choices?" Damien asked, joining her before the eternal flame. Even after years of soul-bonded connection, his presence still sent warmth through her enhanced senses. "Not worrying exactly," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "More like marveling at how far we've come. Do you remember what I was like that first night? So afraid of everything I couldn't control." "I remember someone brave enough to risk everything for the chance at freedom," he corrected gently. "The rest was just discovering what you were already capable of." Through the great windows, they could see the morning activities of their expanded realm. Professor Blackwood's granddaughter worked alongside, vampire scholars in libraries that now housed knowledge from both mortal universities and supernatural archives. Dr. Martinez's medical institute treated patients from a dozen different species, their techniques advancing faster than anyone had thought possible. Most remarkably, Children born to mixed families played in gardens where flowers bloomed in eternal twilight, their laughter carrying languages that blended human words with vampire harmonics. These youngsters would grow up knowing no division between species, considering cooperation as natural as breathing. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had simply gone through with the wedding, Ilara mused, watching a group of teenagers practice the intricate dances that had become traditional at interspecies celebrations. You would have withered away, Damien said with absolute certainty. Not quickly, perhaps, but inevitably. And the world would have remained divided, both species poorer for the separation. A soft knock interrupted their reflection. Sarah entered, now bearing the title of ambassador to mortal realms, her duties having expanded far beyond anything she could have imagined in her days as a lady's maid. "Your Majesties," she said with a smile that still carried traces of wonder at her transformed circumstances, "the delegation from the Australian vampire community has arrived. They're requesting formal inclusion in the Unity Accord. The Unity Accord had grown from their original peace treaty into a comprehensive framework governing supernatural mortal cooperation across 6 continents. What had begun as a desperate attempt to prevent war had evolved into the foundation for a genuinely integrated world. How many does that make? Ilara asked, though her enhanced memory already knew the answer. 47 communities formally joined, with 19 more in various stages of negotiation, Sarah replied. The Johannesburg Enclave should finalize their membership next month, and we've received inquiries from groups as far away as New Zealand. Damien moved to the great map that dominated one wall of their private chambers, its surface marked with glowing points representing every location where vampires and mortals had chosen cooperation over conflict. The lights had multiplied beyond anything they had dared hope for during those first uncertain months. "It's working," he said, wonder evident in his voice despite his centuries of experience. "Not perfectly, not without struggle, but it's actually working." Ilara joined him at the map, her hand finding his as they contemplated the scope of what they had built together. The eternal flame cast dancing shadows across the illuminated points, making them seem to pulse with life. "More than working," she corrected. "Thriving, growing into something neither species could have achieved. Alone, the crystal pendant she had worn since her first morning in the vampire realm now pulsed with warm recognition of how far she had traveled from that. Frightened young woman. But the silver locket containing her mother's portrait still rested close to her heart, a reminder that some loves transcend time and transformation. "Ready for the next phase?" Damien asked, gesturing toward reports detailing ambitious projects that would have seemed impossible just years ago. Ilara smiled, her fangs catching the eternal flame's light. "Always," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her transformed being. The future stretched ahead like an unwritten story, full of challenges and wonders they had yet to imagine.